Good evening, everyone. On behalf of the Southern Africa Solidarity Committee and the Institute of Politics, welcome to all of you here in the forum and to all of you listening from Memorial Hall. The Southern Africa Solidarity Committee would like to express its gratitude to the Institute of Politics for providing the forum for tonight's event, tonight's appearance by Bishop Tutu, and for its help in organizing this event. I represent the Southern Africa Solidarity Committee. We are an organization of undergraduates committed to supporting the people of South Africa in their efforts to end apartheid and to realize self-determination. We are very serious about doing everything that we, as Americans and as students at Harvard, can do to aid their effort. We have all come here to listen to the words of a great man, Bishop Desmond Tutu. But I think it would be a mistake if we were to leave here having only heard his words. We ought to realize the implications of his words in terms of ourselves. Bishop Tutu reminds us all of our obligation to the people of South Africa. The United States, through its trade with South Africa and its investments in that country, supports a government that denies the majority of its citizens the most basic human and political rights. Continuing to invest in South Africa makes us part of the problem. The United States must end its support of apartheid. Harvard, through its nearly $500 million invested in companies that do business in South Africa, is part of the problem. At Harvard, we have witnessed a seemingly endless debate on divestiture. The university claims that its investments encourage progress. But let us look at the facts. Apartheid has not been dismantled. It has only grown more subtle in the methods of its oppression. While Harvard has applied its so-called progressive investment policies, the situation in South Africa for South Africa's blacks has progressively grown worse. Harvard must end its support of apartheid. And while we are pleased that Harvard has set aside $1 million for projects related to South Africa, this is not and cannot be a substitute for divesting the millions that Harvard has invested in South Africa. This university has and continues to profit from the system of apartheid. And that is why, over the past decade, the Southern Africa Solidarity Committee has called on Harvard University to sell all of its stocks in companies that do business in South Africa. Divestiture is our obligation. Steps other than divestiture are secondary steps that ought to follow complete divestment. We have invited tonight 7 members of the Harvard Corporation. We hope that they have come to listen to the bishop's words, because they will decide Harvard's role in South Africa. The final decision rests not with the students, nor with university employees. The final decision rests not with the people of America. It rests not even with the black South Africans themselves. Only 7 men, the Harvard Corporation, only these 7 men can decide if Harvard's $500 million will continue to support apartheid. Events such as this one tonight are just so valuable to all of us. And Bishop Tutu has agreed to have some more interaction with you. He has agreed to a question and answer period. So you have all received note cards, and on them we request that you write a question for Bishop Tutu. He will try to answer as many as he can get to. At this time, I would especially like to thank Mrs. Melvin Belli, President of the Adelphia Foundation, which has coordinated the Bishop's tour.
Thank you. I want to thank Harvard and also Jerome for inviting the Bishop at this very prestigious forum. The Adelphia Foundation is involved on this national tour on organizing for security, scheduling, and fundraising, be a 12-city sweep. And it will include Washington, New York, Philadelphia, Los Angeles, San Francisco, of course Atlanta on the 19th and 20th, and many other American cities. All of the monies that are raised are going directly to the South African Council of Churches and will be used for educational scholarships and for food and shelter for the families of political prisoners. We have a group of dignitaries here that I want to acknowledge at this time, and that is the family of Bishop Tutu. Leah Tutu, in her own right, is a recognized national activist. She is the head of the Domestic Workers Project, and his daughters and son-in-law and Tembi executive assistant are here. Would you stand, please? Thank you on behalf of the Adelphia Foundation.
I would also like to thank an anonymous donor for donating the $10,000 honorarium that will go to aid the work of the South African Council of Churches. In the dramatic and sometimes overwhelming events that have developed in South Africa this past year, there has been a constant voice, that of Bishop Desmond Tutu. He has played a leading role in unifying the opposition to apartheid. He, along with Nelson and Winnie Mandela, has come to represent dignity and freedom for people of South Africa. His words have brought home the reality of apartheid to millions of Americans. He serves as an inspiration to all those who are working to dismantle apartheid. He was a founding patron of the United Democratic Front, a coalition of 600 groups that represent people of all colors, encompassing trade unions, civic organizations, churches, and student groups. The UDF has worked continually for justice in South Africa through nonviolent means. And in the face of violent attacks upon its membership by the police and the military of the South African government, and in the face of jailing of its leadership, it has remained nonviolent. He has also served as General Secretary of the South African Council of Churches, which represents all the ecumenical churches in South Africa, and which has uttered one of the first and one of the longest calls to the people of the world to end apartheid. On behalf of the Southern Africa Solidarity Committee and the Institute of Politics, it is my very great privilege to present 1984 Nobel Peace Prize laureate and Anglican Bishop of Johannesburg, Bishop Desmond Tutu.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. What? Good evening. It is a very, very great joy, very great privilege to be back here
As someone who holds an honorary degree of this place, I am very thrilled to be here. Most of what I shall be saying is not new. I am repetitive, which gets to remind me of the story of this university professor who gave a very brilliant speech and got asked several times to speak, and he used to give the same speech, brilliant, not in the same place. And then one day he said to his driver, I'm getting a little bored with myself listening to, I know it is admittedly a good speech, but I'm tired of delivering it. And his driver said, well, actually, you know, having listened to it so many times, I am word perfect in it. And so they agreed that they were going to swap places. After the driver had practiced the appropriate gestures, they then worked out that they were going to arrange it in such a way that there would be no time for questions at the end. And come this great day, the driver turned professor goes up to the podium and does deliver a scintillating address. Well, unfortunately, they left a little time over for questions. And as always, there would be obstreperous people in the audience who would want to trip up any speaker. And someone in the audience gets up and he asks one of the most erudite, most complicated questions. And the professor says, is that all? Even my driver at the back there can answer it. But I would like to I don't have a driver here. Genuinely, I want to be able to say to you, thank you very much. Some people may have wanted to say to you that what you do 10,000 miles away from South Africa won't set the Thames on fire. It makes little difference. Don't allow yourselves to be kidded by such people. What you do reverberates around the world, especially what Harvard does. In a twofold way, at the very least, when, as you have been doing, you support the struggle for justice, for peace, for reconciliation, then the victims of apartheid, that vicious, evil, immoral system, have their morale boosted so that your impact is a positive one on the victims of apartheid. And they say, people care. The world cares. And therefore, our cause must be just. Our cause is a noble cause. And our cause will prevail in the end, despite all appearances to the contrary. And it has a negative impact on the perpetrators of apartheid, what you do and what you say, if it is in support of justice and peace and reconciliation. For the perpetrators of an evil system will find ways of seeking to discredit you, because that's the only answer they will have to the truth. They can't match up your truth, your justice, your goodness with their own. And so they use the old ploy of, you are communist inspired. And you know it's made a difference in this country. In 1984, when my wife and I came purportedly for a sabbatical, if someone had said to us at that time or to anybody else, in 1985, the US Congress will be debating seriously, not whether sanctions, but what sanctions to apply, we would have said, you want to go and lie on a couch, don't you? And you want to speak to this person with a pad on their knee. But something happened in this country, didn't it? People power happened, which dramatically altered, what, the ball game? It certainly dramatically altered the moral texture of what was happening around here. So that Congress had to take note of the mood of the people. And the president of this country had to take note. And because he feared something that was undreamt of in 1984, a veto override, he had to adjust his so-called constructive engagement policy. That is not my main speech, actually. It is just a preamble to say to you, thank you. Thank you. And students have been in the forefront of this. When I came in May of last year and went to a number of campuses, at a time when people ought to have been involved in worrying about their grades. Now, I don't want to be subversive. You must be interested in your grades. But at a time when they ought to have been, 15,000, 8,000, 12,000 were filling amphitheaters and other venues, protesting, demonstrating, witnessing. And I kept saying to them as I went from one place to the other, you know, you are giving us back a new faith in human nature. You are saying that there are some things that are probably more important than good degrees. Now, I don't poo-poo good degrees. Not in these precincts. But it was a tremendous thing, actually, because what they were saying as they welcomed us warmly, they were saying, Bishop Tutu, don't get too swollen-headed. We love you, yes, but what we're really saying is, can you take back with you to those people in South Africa? Take back to them our love, our caring, our commitment. And you see, quite unlike Vietnam, when many of those who were students at that time, many of them were concerned for Americans, and they were concerned also for themselves because they were draftable. Now, I'm not saying that they were not being altruistic and so forth in their concern about ending that particular American involvement in an ugly war. But there certainly was a small measure of self-interest. the extraordinary phenomenon about the anti-apartheid movement on university campuses, college campuses, is the fact that in many ways you needn't be involved. You needn't, but you are. And that's tremendous. And so I say, on behalf of millions, thank you. That's the only time I ever claim that I am speaking on behalf of millions. So you can go and tell that gentleman that you will know that last Christmas was decreed in the black community as one that was to be observed as a Black Christmas. In South Africa, there are two groups of people mainly, black, white. A little boy out with his mommy one day saw a flight of geese and excitedly said, "Mommy, mommy, look at those gooses." And mommy properly said, "No, darling, we don't call them gooses, we call them geese." And little darling said, "Oh well, they still look like gooses to me." Who you are determines what you see. Where you are decides what you perceive. And back home, black, white, this is a generalization. I've got to be very careful. I've got to try to speak with the restraint of an academic. On the whole, when we look at what purports to be the same reality, we perceive it differently. Now that does sound very learned. When you ask most white South Africans, they will tell you that it was utterly unnecessary that there should have been any trouble at all because now the government is reforming. It has, after all, repealed the law prohibiting marriage between whites and people of other races, and that which makes it a criminal offense for sexual intercourse to take place between whites and people of other races. Have they not now said that there will be a common citizenship for all South Africans and even universal suffrage? Have the government not already produced a new constitution which for the first time in the history of South Africa makes provision for persons who are not white to participate in the highest assembly of the land to share in the business of legislating? Why? There are now so-called non-whites in the cabinet of the central government, and at local government level, many black African townships are being run by their own freely elected black city or town councils, and the government has said intends to open the President's Council to include black African members. Admittedly, this council is not a legislative body, but it can suggest possible legislation and can adjudicate when there is a dispute between the different chambers of the tricameral parliament. It should be noted as well that most sport, so they will tell you, in South Africa is no longer segregated. And many business companies are implementing various codes of conduct, such as the EEC code and the Sullivan principles, which have led to quite considerable improvements in the work conditions of blacks and in an enhancement of their quality of life shown in their vastly improved housing, in their possession of expensive cars, in their ability to send their children to expensive private schools. Why? Now at work, most segregation has disappeared. Blacks share the same toilet and canteen facilities with their white workmates. Their chances of upward mobility have improved considerably, and it is same pay for the same work in most companies. So the foreign companies, we are told ad nauseum, are a power for good, and their enlightened policies are important trailblazers helping to bring about change in South Africa. And that is supposed to justify their presence in our country. That is the perception of most whites. The perception of most blacks is almost the direct opposite of this. It is as if we inhabit different planets. And this is a slight digression. we live in Soweto. But as the Bishop of Johannesburg, I have an official residence in the white part of town. On the front lawn of our, what we facetiously call our country residence, we could build 10 Soweto type houses, and there would still be space available. I really don't know how many bathrooms we've got in that house. And if I were white, I would need a lot of grace to want to share that kind of life with others. And a remarkable thing is that there are whites in South Africa who would say genuinely, we want to see change happen. It is two different worlds. When we leave the Johannesburg part, the town part, in the early morning at 8 o'clock, the birds are twittering in the trees, the air is clean, and it's fluttering through the leafy branches of the trees. Clean air. And then we're driving to Soweto to take a service there, and we have to put on our headlights because of the smog. And what do they know about a state of emergency? State of emergency? What are you talking about? They haven't seen Caspers. The Caspers don't rumble down their streets. There is no tear gas. There are no rubber bullets for them. That was just an aside. We look at what purports to be the same reality, and our perceptions, as I've said, are quite different. Most blacks will say that many of the so-called reforms which make white so ecstatic are really cosmetic. They deal only with peripheral issues. The harsh reality of apartheid remains as oppressive, as ruthless, as immoral, as evil, as unchristian as it ever was. Whilst it is good, and it will be churlish to pretend that it isn't, for the few who are interested in interracial marriage, that the relevant laws prohibiting this have been repealed, this in the nature of the case will be only a very few people. The legislative pillars of apartheid remain firmly in place. South Africans are still classified according to race, as if they were prize animals, according to the Population Registration Act. Those who are white remain, as always, the most privileged at the top of the racial pyramid, and other races are arranged in hierarchical stratification with diminishing rights below the all-powerful white oligarchy, until you reach the broad base of the pyramid, representing the vast majority of this land, the black indigenous inhabitants with minimal rights. South Africans still inhabit their segregated residential areas. I was describing something of this reality. In terms of the Group Areas Act, which is still very much in place, The whites again occupying the most salubrious, well-planned, usually affluent suburbs with standard recreational and other facilities, whilst the other races live in areas that are decidedly of a lower quality, usually than those occupied by whites, until you reach the bottom of the scale in the black ghetto townships that you have grown used to in the television pictures. Monotonous row after monotonous row of identical matchbox houses in ill-lit, often dusty, unpaved streets, areas that normally lack the most rudimentary amenities, which in the other parts are taken for granted. In most of these areas, blacks still do not have freehold title, for they have been regarded as only temporary birds of passage in the white man's urban areas, tolerated as long as they were able-bodied and fit to work. When they could not work anymore, then they were considered to be discards. What a former cabinet minister. And I mean, you really wonder whether he heard himself. He said, carelessly, describing our mothers and our fathers. He described them as superfluous appendages, because now they were no longer able to provide this important commodity, their labor. Now to be discarded as if they were useless chattels, useless things, not human persons, of infinite value because they were created in the image of God as everybody else. Even in the time of reform, which is what we have been told we live in, over 150,000 blacks in 1984 had fallen foul of the past laws. Blacks still did not have the right of moving freely in the land of their birth. The past laws were also still firmly in place, despite the promise that Dr. Pete Korenhoff, at the time a member of the government and now chairman of the President's Council, the promise that the government had declared war on the Dompas. This was the same gentleman who a few years ago here in America declared apartheid is dead. Wonderful obituary. No one, so far as I have been able to make out, has yet seen fit to invite us to the funeral. And this corpse is certainly still able to inflict much untold suffering and anguish to many of God's children unnecessarily. You thought of how the Nazis had treated the Jews when you looked on some of the treatment meted out to blacks. This is the only country in the world where it is a crime for a national to look for work if his or her pass is not in order. Blacks were birds of passage because they were, after all, to be citizens of spuriously independent Bantustan homelands, most of whom had not seen nor known of these homelands until the white man in his wisdom and greed had decreed they belonged to, so that they were turned into aliens in the land of their birth, because an alien cannot claim many rights, least of all political rights. That is why for a while I traveled not on a South African passport, but on a document that described my nationality as undeterminable at present. Now I do have a South African passport which says I am a South African citizen, but with no political rights at all. And in order to satisfy their racist ideology, the minority government has uprooted over 3 million people and dumped them as if they were rubbish in the poverty-stricken, arid Bantustan resettlement camps where children starve not because there is no food in South Africa, since our country is normally a net exporter of food, but by deliberate government policy. A country where the father, if he is lucky, will become a migrant worker having left his family in the Bantustan homeland to eke out a miserable existence, to live in a single-sex hostel for 11 months of the year, so that black family life is being undermined by the migratory labor system, not accidentally, but by deliberate government policy. And this in a country that many claim to be the last bastion of civilization, Western civilization, against the predatory inroads of communism. The government has introduced a new constitution which was hailed in many quarters as a step in the right direction. A constitution which deliberately excluded 73% of the population, the blacks, from any share in the decision-making processes of a tricameral parliament, which was meant to hoodwink the international community into believing that South Africa was now reforming. How could this monstrosity be declared a step in the right direction? It was a step away from democracy. It was a co-opting of the Indians and so-called coloreds to be junior partners in apartheid, collaborators in their own oppression, and that of their black fellow victims. And you know, the ratio in the parliamentary committees was to be 4 whites to 2 coloreds to 1 Indian. Now, even if your maths was bad, you know that 2 plus 1 will never equal 4, and let alone be more than 4. So that the Constitution perpetuates white minority rule. And it is this Constitution which blacks interpreted as meaning that the politics of exclusion, the politics of apartheid, had now reached its nadir, and which as such they rejected, and that was the start of the unrest in August 1984. An unrest which has claimed over 1,000 lives in our country, unrest that is proving endemic, unrest that you have seen portrayed on your television screens. Peaceful protest in our country has become virtually impossible. The government imposed a state of emergency on most of South Africa and placed the army in black townships. You have seen what the security forces do. They hide in crates to lure children in a decoy system, to stone them. And when they do, they shoot and they kill. They have detained thousands. Children have been arrested and detained, 14-year-olds and younger. Community leaders have been detained. And so you have the stage set for the state president to announce wonderful advances in South Africa in his wonderful Rubicon speech. And he comes along and he speaks about common citizenship, about universal suffrage. And just when we are getting excited about this, we discover that they don't quite mean the same thing as other people mean by this. The kernel issue in South Africa, my dear friends, is the issue of political power sharing. And nobody, so far as I have been able to make out, has ever voluntarily given up power or been willing to share power. They have to be compelled. The codes that are applied, the Sullivan Code and other codes, will not affect the fundamental structures of apartheid. They are ameliorative. And we don't want apartheid improved. We don't want apartheid reformed even. You don't reform a Frankenstein, you destroy it. You can't reform apartheid. As Mrs. Motlana put it, we don't want our chains made more comfortable. We want our chains removed. And our last chance for peaceful change, for true reconciliation, will come with repentance and justice if the international community is ready to apply effective political, diplomatic, but above all, economic pressure. Foreign companies have consciously or unconsciously, whether they like this truth or not, have helped to buttress apartheid by their investments in South Africa. They did little before the pressure of the disinvestment campaign caused them to find ways of justifying their presence in South Africa. It is not the height of my ambition to share a toilet with a white person. I want to be recognized for what I am, a human being created in God's image and a citizen of my land of birth. I mean, it must be odd that I, a bishop of an important diocese of our church in South Africa, a Nobel laureate, 54 years of age, should not vote in my motherland, and yet a white, and more recently colored and Indian, 18-year-old can vote. I hear people say, but if sanctions are applied, the first people to suffer are blacks. Blacks retort, when did you suddenly become so altruistic? Did you not benefit from black sheep and black migratory labor? Did you ever protest against these and other causes of black suffering? No, our people have recently in 2 surveys shown what they believe. Both surveys indicate that over 70% of blacks want sanctions of some sort to be applied. It is the last chance for reasonably peaceful change. The year ended with landmines and bomb blasts. We have said we oppose all violence, that of a repressive system and that of those who want to overthrow it. You can change a political system either by voting the people out of power. We can't as blacks because we don't have the vote. Or you can overthrow them violently. We are still seeking to find a peaceful way. We want a South Africa for all its people, black and white, where we will live amicably together as God intended us, as members of one family, the human family, God's family. And so we ask, help us to use the last peaceful instrument available to us, your pressure. For nothing in South Africa has changed without pressure. My dear friends, I wish to declare here that
You little brat, let us out of here. Come on, tell the people that run this place to shut up. Shut up! Tell them to let us out of here in 2 minutes flat, or we're going to tear this place apart with our bare hands.
I want to declare here my endorsement for election to the Board of Overseers of Kenneth Simmons, John Plotz, and Gay Seidman. And want to finish by saying that the decisions that you want to make about apartheid are not ultimately political decisions. They are moral decisions. Are you or are you not on the side of justice? Are you or are you not on the side of right? Are you or are you not on the side of goodness? I would hope that there would be no debate at all on those issues, that you have made that moral decision. You have made that moral commitment. Let me tell you something. We are going to be free. And we would like very much to be able to say when we are on the other side of this liberation game, for which people have given their lives. People have been incarcerated. Young children, 4-year-olds, have been killed. We want, when we get onto that other side, to say, you know something? Harvard University was with us. Harvard University helped us.
We would like to thank you all, everyone here in the forum and everyone watching from Memorial Hall. I've been told that some of you weren't aware that we were collecting donations for tonight's event. The $10,000 that I mentioned earlier didn't help us pay for it. So please help the Southern Africa Solidarity Committee defray the costs of this event. Please donate something. A little would be good, a lot would be a lot better. We'll be collecting donations as you exit. Please give generously, and thank you very much.